Rain slashed across the Wyoming plains, cold and merciless, the kind of storm that turned roads into rivers and tested the grit of any soul still willing to call this land home. A lone rider pressed forward against the downpour, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low, his oilskin coat dripping as though the sky had declared war upon him. His horse snorted, ears flat, but obeyed, carrying him through the mud and shadow. Somewhere beyond that curtain of storm lay his ranch, half standing, half ruined, and the only thing tethering him to life. In a land where every sunrise promised danger, Ethan Callahan's heart remained the greatest frontier he had yet to conquer. He had not always been so hollow-eyed, so stiff with unspoken sorrow. Years ago, his ranch was full of laughter, his wife's voice weaving warmth into the log walls of their homestead. But the frontier demanded sacrifice, and a fever that swept through the valley 2 winters back had taken more than cattle. It had taken her, leaving Ethan with only silence, broken fences, and acres of land too wild for one man to tame. The nights dragged into years. He tried pouring himself into work, but each day ended the same, alone by the fire, staring at shadows that belonged to no one. And so, after months of wrestling with pride, he had written a letter. Not to kin, for he had none left. Not to neighbors, for he had grown tired of their pitying looks. But to an agency that promised lonely men a chance at companionship. A mail-order bride. It felt shameful at first. A practical decision, like ordering a plow or replacing a wagon wheel. Yet, as the weeks passed, Ethan found himself glancing down the road whenever dust stirred in the distance, his mind whispering, what kind of woman would answer such a call? Surely, she would be plain, desperate, perhaps even broken. A woman with no better place to go. It was enough. He needed hands to help on the ranch, someone to share the silence, nothing more. At least, that was the story he told himself. Word of his letter spread faster than prairie fire. By the time he rode into town to buy feed, men were already smirking into their cups at the saloon. Callahan's buying himself a wife, one jeered. Bet she's as sour-faced as a mule. Others laughed, shaking their heads. Out here, everyone carried scars, but few invited new ones willingly. Ethan ignored them, jaw tight. The truth was, he barely believed in his own decision. He had built walls so high around his grief that the thought of letting someone climb them seemed near impossible. The train was due on a Wednesday, and the whole town seemed to gather, eager for a show. Children clung to their mothers' skirts. Men leaned against hitching posts, and even the storekeeper's wife peeked out from behind her curtains. The whistle cut through the air, shrill and piercing, as the iron beast rolled into the station, belching steam and smoke. Ethan stood at the edge of the platform, boots planted, hat in hand, expecting the moment he had been dreading for months. One by one, passengers stepped down, merchants, travelers, a preacher dusting his collar. Then she appeared. Not the plain, sunken-eyed woman townsfolk had bet their coins on. No, the woman who stepped from the train was a vision that seemed out of place in the grid of Wyoming. Isabella Moreno, dark hair, rich as midnight, fell in waves beneath a modest bonnet. Her skin, bronzed by southern sun, held the quiet strength of someone who had endured more than her years revealed. Her dress was simple, but her bearing, straight-backed, poised, spoke of a dignity that silenced even the most cynical smirks. The laughter died on the platform. Men gawked. Women whispered. Ethan's breath caught, not from desire, but from confusion. She was not what he expected. Not all. Isabella's gaze swept the crowd before landing on him. Her eyes, deep and unreadable, met his without hesitation. No flinch, no nervous smile. Just calm acknowledgement, as though she already knew the shape of his doubts. Ethan stepped forward, clumsy with the weight of the moment, tipping his hat. "Miss Moreno," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. She inclined her head in return, her reply gentle yet firm. "Mr. Callahan." The ride back to the ranch was cloaked in silence, save for the creak of leather and the distant roll of thunder. Ethan wrestled with words, but none seemed right. What did one say to a stranger who had crossed states, even borders, to share his name? Isabella, fur apart, sat straight in the wagon seat, her hands folded, her eyes scanning the endless stretch of plains as though searching for something familiar. When his horse spooked at a sudden crack of lightning, Ethan tugged at the reins, muttering a curse. Before he could steady the animal, Isabella reached forward, her hand brushing the horse's neck. Her voice, low and melodic, murmured in Spanish, and the animal stilled, snorting softly, its panic dissolving under her touch. Ethan stared, unable to mask his surprise. Few women out here knew how to calm livestock, let alone with such surety. Isabella did not explain, or did she glance at him for approval. She simply drew her hand back and resumed her seat, eyes fixed ahead. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. Not from the storm, not from loss, but from the presence of a woman who was far more than he had bargained for. By the time the ranch came into view, fences splintered, barn roof sagging, fields scarred by drought. The silence between them had deepened into something heavier than words. Ethan realized with a quiet unease that the woman beside him might not just change his days of loneliness. She might unravel everything he thought he knew about himself. And as the storm rolled on over the hills, it seemed to whisper a warning. Nothing on this land comes without a price. The morning after Isabella's arrival broke clear and sharp, the air crisp with the scent of wet earth. The storm had scoured the land, leaving the plains glistening as if the world had been freshly washed. Ethan rose early, as he always did, to the sound of roosters and the creak of the windmill. He half expected to find Isabella asleep, unready for the demands of ranch life. Instead, when he stepped out into the yard, he froze. She was already there, skirts tucked neatly, sleeves rolled up, a basket balanced on her hip as she scattered grain for the hens. Ethan watched, the sight both strange and unsettling. Most newcomers balked at the mud, the endless chores, the harshness of the land. Isabella moved as though she belonged, her motions steady and precise. A hen pecked too eagerly at her hand, and she only laughed softly, shooing it away with a flick of her wrist. It was not the sound of a stranger. It was the sound of someone who understood work, who had long ago given up the luxury of complaint. "You don't have to," Ethan said, his voice breaking the morning calm. She turned, eyes calm and unreadable. "If I'm to live here, I will work here," she replied. The words carried no defensiveness, no challenge, just truth. Ethan nodded, though unease gnawed at him. He had asked for a helper, yes, but something about the ease with which she stepped into his world made him wary. Days bled into rhythm. Isabella took to mending torn shirts, repairing cracked jars, and even kneading bread with hands that bore faint scars. Ethan caught himself watching her more than once, silently measuring the distance between who he thought she would be and who she truly was. She seemed unshaken by loneliness, unbothered by gossip. And yet, at night, when the lamplight flickered against her face, he sometimes caught the shadow of something hidden, an ache, perhaps, as old as his own. The first true test came not from whispers, but from the land itself. A storm unlike the first roared over the mountains one evening, tearing across the plains with furious strength. Wind slammed against the barn, ripping shingles from the roof. Ethan threw himself into the fight, hauling ropes, hammering boards, shouting over the gale. He expected Isabella to stay inside, as any sensible woman would. Instead, she appeared at his side, skirts whipping in the wind, hair plastered to her face by rain. Without hesitation, she grasped the other end of the rope and pulled with him, her slight frame straining against the storm. "Get inside," Ethan shouted, his voice raw. This is my home too," she shot back, her words carried away by the wind. Together, they held fast until the storm relented, leaving the barn battered but standing. Ethan, chest heaving, turned to her. Mud streaked her face, water dripping from her hair, but she was smiling, not with joy, but with relief, with the satisfaction of survival. For a breathless moment, he saw her not as an interloper, not as a stranger, but as a woman who shared his fight. His heart surged unexpectedly, and he hated himself for it. With a sharp breath, he turned away, gripping the rope until his knuckles whitened. That night, as he sat alone by the fire, the ghost of his late wife's laughter stirred in his memory. He had buried her once, promised never to replace her. And yet Isabella's presence threatened to carve cracks in the wall he had built around his grief. He stared at the flames, torn between the weight of the past and the quiet pull of something new. The town, meanwhile, had not grown quiet. Whispers swelled, curiosity giving way to suspicion. "She's too fine for him," one man muttered at the saloon. "Mark my words, Callahan's got himself trouble." A ranch hand, half drunk and spoiling for a fight, cornered Ethan one afternoon outside the mercantile. "She's not for you," the man sneered, his breath sour with whiskey. "A woman like that? She'll leave you the second she finds better." Ethan's fists clenched. He tried to walk away, but the man shoved him hard. Rage flared, sharp and unbidden. The two men grappled in the dirt, fists striking flesh, boots kicking gravel. It ended with Ethan standing over the man, chest heaving, jaw bloodied, while the townsfolk watched in silence. Isabella, who had witnessed the scuffle from the wagon, said nothing. Yet that night, her eyes lingered on him longer than usual, measuring, perhaps, the man she had chosen to bind her fate to. As tension simmered, a new presence emerged. One evening, while Ethan and Isabella repaired the fence line, a shadow moved at the tree line. Ethan's hand went to his rifle, but the figure did not advance. Instead, he stepped into the fading light, a tall man with weathered skin, hair bound in braids, and a scar slashing across his cheek. He spoke little, his gaze steady, unreadable. Lone Hawk, a Lakota warrior known by whispers in the valley, regarded Ethan with the silence of a man who had seen too much. At last, he said only bandits. He gestured toward the hills, where smoke rose faint against the horizon. "They come soon." His eyes flicked to Isabella, and in that glance there was no mockery, no curiosity, only respect. She inclined her head in acknowledgement, answering a language older than words. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, Lone Hawk melted back into the shadows. Ethan stood in uneasy silence, the echo of his warning heavy in the air. Isabella placed a hand on the rough wood of the fence, her voice quiet but steady. "Danger comes whether we invite it or not." And for the first time, Ethan wondered if her strength might be the only thing keeping the weight of the frontier from crushing them both. The air on the ranch grew heavier in the days that followed, as though the land itself held its breath. Lone Hawk's warning lingered like smoke, unseen but never gone. Ethan sharpened tools until his hands ached, patched holes in the barn roof, and checked the rifle by the door each night. Yet no preparation could quiet the unease gnawing at him. Isabella, meanwhile, moved through the ranch with a quiet resilience. She fed the animals, carried water, mended leather, never complaining, never asking what dangers lay beyond the hills. Ethan found himself both grateful and unnerved. She had secrets. He could feel them pressing beneath her calm surface, just as surely as the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The first sign came at dusk. A plume of smoke curled from the direction of the valley, black and angry against the fading sky. Ethan rode hard, his horse's hooves tearing through dry grass, only to find the neighboring farm smoldering. Fences trampled, livestock gone, the homestead stripped bare. He crouched near the ashes, his jaw set. Bandits, ruthless and methodical. Whoever lived here had been lucky to escape alive. Ethan returned to the ranch under cover of darkness, his face grim. Isabella waited on the porch, lantern in hand. She asked no questions, only studied his expression, and in that silence Ethan saw her courage. Most women would have begged to leave. Isabella only nodded once, as if to say, "I will not run." The next trial came not from men, but from the land itself. Ethan and Isabella had taken the herd higher into the hills, searching for grass untouched by drought. The cattle moved sluggishly, nerves taut, ears flicking at every sound. Ethan sensed it a moment before it struck, a low growl, the shimmer of movement in the brush. A cougar. It sprang, tawny and muscled, eyes burning with hunger. Ethan's rifle swung up, but the beast was too fast, slamming into him, claws ripping across his arm. They crashed into the dirt, a tangle of teeth and fury. Pain seared white-hot through him as he fought to keep the jaws from his throat. A crack split the air. The cougar jerked, a spray of dust exploding near its flank. Another shot rang out, this time true. The beast staggered, then collapsed, twitching once before lying still. Ethan gasped, blood streaking his sleeve, as Isabella lowered the rifle, her hands trembling. The barrel still smoked, the echo of the shot rolling across the hills. For a moment she could not move, her eyes wide, her breath unsteady. Then she forced herself to set the rifle down carefully, her lips pressed tight, as though holding back a flood of memories. "You've shot before," Ethan said, his voice ragged. Isabella's hands clenched, then released. "My father taught me," she murmured, her accent thickening under the weight of confession. "He was an officer. Before the war took him." She did not say which war, but Ethan knew enough to piece the truth. Mexico had bled under battles that left families shattered. Isabella was no stranger to loss. They buried the cougar where it fell. As the dirt fell over its body, Ethan caught Isabella's gaze. She was not fragile, not a frightened girl hiding behind beauty. She was a survivor, carved from the same merciless hand that had shaped the West itself. Something shifted in him then, respect, admiration, and the faintest spark of trust. That night, Lone Hawk appeared again, silent as the stars. He crouched by the fire outside the barn, his eyes fixed on the flames. Ethan joined him, offering coffee, though the Lakota warrior said little. It was Isabella who broke the quiet, placing bread near him without a word. Lone Hawk's gaze flicked to hers, and in that moment, unspoken understanding passed between them. A woman who did not shrink from hardship, and a man who had seen too much of it. Ethan felt like an outsider to the exchange, but he did not interrupt. Trust, he realized, could be built without words. Later, when Lone Hawk disappeared into the darkness, Isabella and Ethan remained by the fire. The night was sharp with cold, the flames crackling as sparks leapt skyward. For a long while, neither spoke. Finally, Isabella's voice broke the silence, low and steady. "I did not come here to be rescued," she said, her eyes fixed on the fire, not him. "I came because there was nothing left for me in Mexico. My family is gone. My home burned. And my uncle, he would have forced me into a marriage I could not endure. So I left. I chose this." Her words cut through him like a blade. All this time, he had wondered what kind of woman would come so far for a stranger's hand. Now he knew. She was not desperate, not weak. She was searching for dignity, for a place where her life could be hers. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight. "And did you find it here?" he asked. She turned her gaze to him at last, her eyes dark and glimmering with firelight. "That depends," she said softly, "on whether you are a man who keeps walls or one who dares to build again." The words lingered long after the fire burned low. Ethan lay awake that night, staring at the rafters of his cabin, the storm inside him louder than the coyotes outside. For years, he had lived as half a man, chained to grief, convinced there could be no life beyond the shadow of loss. But Isabella's presence unsettled that truth. She was not what he had expected. She was something far more dangerous. She was hope. Dawn came restless, the sky streaked in pale gray, the wind carrying the scent of smoke before Ethan even stepped out of the cabin. Lone Hawk's warning had ripened into truth. Bandits were coming. From the rise beyond the cottonwoods, riders appeared, half a dozen shadows against the breaking light, their horses kicking up dust, their rifles gleaming. They rode with the cruel ease of men who had burned before, who had taken before, and would again. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. He checked the rifle by the door, his injured arm aching but steady enough. Isabella stood beside him, already tying her hair back, her eyes sharp, unflinching. "They will not take this place," she said, her voice iron beneath the calm. Ethan wanted to send her inside, to lock her away from the blood about to be spilled. But one look at her, fierce and resolute, told him she would not be sheltered. The bandits circled the yard like wolves. Their leader, a broad man with a jagged scar down his jaw, spat into the dirt. "Callahan," he barked, "we'll take your cattle, your guns, and your woman. Step aside, and maybe we'll let you keep breathing." Ethan raised his rifle, the barrel steady. "You'll take nothing," he growled. His voice carried the weight of every loss, every bitter season endured. The bandit leader sneered, and the standoff broke in a storm of gunfire. Bullets shattered the silence, splintering fence posts and tearing through the air. Ethan fired, dropping one rider from his horse. Lone Hawk appeared from the tree line like a phantom, arrows whistling, striking true. Chaos erupted. Horses screamed. Men cursed. Gunpowder thickened the air. Isabella ducked behind the water trough, dragging a wounded cowhand into cover, her hands swift and sure as she bound his bleeding arm. A bullet grazed the porch post near her head, but she did not falter. When Ethan staggered, reloading clumsily with his injured arm, Isabella seized the rifle from the wagon and fired. The recoil jolted her shoulder, but her shot found its mark. Another bandit fell, tumbling into the dust. The leader roared, spurring his horse straight toward the house. Ethan met him head-on, the two colliding in a blur of fists and fury. The rifle fell from Ethan's grip as the man tackled him into the dirt. Blows rained, each strike burning through his ribs, his vision swimming. Yet with a guttural cry, Ethan fought back, grappling for the knife at the man's belt. They rolled in the dust, choking on sweat and blood, until Ethan drove the blade into the earth beside the man's throat. The bandit froze, breath heaving, eyes wide. Ethan's voice, low and ragged, cut through the chaos. "This land takes everything. Today it takes you." And with a final surge, he ended it. Silence fell like a curtain. The remaining riders, seeing their leader fallen and their numbers broken, fled into the horizon, leaving only dust in their wake. The ranch yard lay scarred, bullet holes in the wood, smoke rising from the barn, the ground littered with blood and ash. Lone Hawk stood at the edge of the yard, bow still in hand, his face unreadable. Isabella dropped the rifle, her chest heaving, her dress torn and stained. Ethan staggered to his feet, blood dripping from a cut above his brow. He looked to Isabella, her hands shaking, her face pale but resolute. She had stood her ground. She had bled for this place as much as he had. For the first time, he saw her not as the bride he had sent for, not as the stranger fate had delivered, but as his equal, his partner. Lone Hawk stepped forward, pressed a single feather into Ethan's hand, and nodded once. Without a word, he turned and disappeared into the trees, as silent and enigmatic as he had come. Ethan closed his fist around the feather, knowing he had been given not just aid, but trust. The days that followed were a blur of repair. Fences rebuilt, wounds stitched, silence heavy. One evening, Ethan stood on the porch, staring at the horizon where the sun bled red into the plains. Isabella joined him, her hands folded before her. He swallowed hard, words clawing at his throat. "You don't have to stay," he said at last. His voice cracked under the weight of honesty. "You've seen what this land is. What I am. Broken. Bitter. A man clinging to ashes." Isabella turned, her gaze unwavering. "I did not come here for perfection," she said. Her voice was soft, but it cut through him like steel. "I came here to begin again, and beginnings are always born from ruins." For a long moment, Ethan could not speak. The wind stirred the prairie grass, carrying with it the scent of smoke and wildflowers. At last, he reached for her hand, rough against delicate, scarred against scarred. She did not flinch. They stood together, two souls forged by loss yet bound by choice, watching as the last light of day gave way to stars. The ranch was scarred, their hearts no less so. But something had been born in the fire, something fierce, fragile, and real. A voice seemed to whisper with the wind across the plains. Sometimes the harshest lands grew the strongest roots, and sometimes the heart found beauty where it never dared to hope. If this story touched your heart, give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments, And don't forget to subscribe for more untold tales of the frontier.